Mikhail Devyatayev was born in 1917, the 13th child of a peasant family in Torbayevo. His life seemed rooted in the soil, destined for a plow. But in 1934, he saw something that shattered the horizon: an air ambulance landing in his village. That single moment ignited a fire that no labor camp could ever extinguish. He worked, he studied, and by 1940 he was a lieutenant, a fighter pilot in the Soviet Air Force. He wasn't just flying, he was becoming one with the sky. When the war broke out on June 22, 1941, Mikhail was one of the first in the air, downing a Junkers Ju-87 on his very first day of combat. He earned the Order of the Red Banner for his cold bravery. But by July 1944, the German Luftwaffe was a cornered, desperate beast. Near Lviv, during a brutal dogfight, Mikhail's Bell P-39 Airacobra was shredded. He parachuted into enemy territory, falling from the grace of flight into a living nightmare. As a Soviet officer and a pilot, he was marked for immediate execution by the Gestapo. But Mikhail was a survivor who understood that to stay alive, he had to disappear. After a failed escape attempt at Łódź, he was sent to the dreaded Sachsenhausen. It was there, in the shadows of the barracks, that he managed the impossible. He swapped his identity with a deceased infantryman named Grigory Nikitenko. He was now just a nameless laborer. Late 1944, a cattle car rattled north toward the Baltic Sea. Inside, Mikhail and 500 other prisoners were destined for the island of Usedom. Their destination was Peenemünde, the most secretive site in the Third Reich. This was the forge of Hitler's vengeance weapons, the V-1 and V-2 rockets. Here, under the direction of Werner von Braun, the Germans were launching the future of warfare into the edge of space. Mikhail, still hidden under the name Nikitenko, was tasked with repairing the very runways these rockets used. He was a pilot standing on the tarmac, forced to clear unexploded bombs. Conditions at Peenemünde were hellish: forced labor, starvation rations, and the constant threat of the guards' brutality. Mikhail watched the V-2s lift off. He cleared debris from the launch sites. He knew this place was too important to remain a secret. He began to gather intelligence, memorizing the layout. He understood that he couldn't just run, he needed a machine. And that machine was sitting right there, just beyond the perimeter fence, the Heinkel H-111 bomber. To the Germans, he was an emaciated, broken man. To Mikhail, he was a commander preparing for his most important mission. Mikhail began his reconnaissance. He didn't watch the guards, he watched the planes, specifically the Heinkel He-111 H-22. He studied the labels on the controls. One afternoon, a German pilot, arrogant in his supremacy, repeated the ignition sequence for the ignorant prisoner to see. He only saw it once. But a pilot's mind is built for patterns. Mikhail memorized every toggle, every lever, every vibration of the engine. He knew that when the time came, he wouldn't have a second chance to learn. In the dead of night, he spoke to them. Sokolov, Krivanogov, Nemchenko, and 7 others. He convinced them he could fly them home. In the dead of night, he spoke to them. Sokolov, Krivanogov, Nemchenko, and 7 others. He convinced them he could fly them home. They were 10 emaciated men, skeletons in rags, planning to hijack a military bomber from a high-security rocket base. The date was set for February 8, 1945. They chose the lunch hour, the only time the guards' attention would waver. It was a window of exactly 90 seconds. 90 seconds between firing squad and sky. Every man knew the cost. Mikhail stood at the center, the only one who could give them wings. It was no longer an escape. It was engineering. February 8, 1945, high noon. Ivan Krivanogov struck first. A single, silent blow with a crowbar took down the lone guard. Peter Kuturgin donned the uniform. To any distant watchtower, they were just another work detail moving toward a plane. They reached the Heinkel. Mikhail climbed into the cockpit. The seat he had memorized but never touched. The engines were ice cold. He hit the switches. Nothing. The batteries were dead. The Germans were starting to notice. Mikhail didn't panic. He hit the ground ignition. This time the starboard engine coughed, sputtered, and finally roared to life. The hunt had begun. The second engine caught. Mikhail pushed the throttle, but the bomber was a beast. It spiraled across the grass, nearly running over the German mechanics. Mikhail stood up in the cockpit, physically stamping on the pedals with his emaciated legs. Bullets shattered the glass. 3 men pulled the control column. The plane gained speed, the end of the runway approaching like a cliff. Finally, at the very edge of the grass, the nose lifted. The Heinkel clawed its way into the gray Baltic sky. Behind them, Peenemünde was in total chaos. They were airborne, but the most dangerous flight of their lives was only just beginning. A Junkers Ju-88 was scrambled to intercept. Mikhail had no guns, no radio, and no armor. He had only 10 lives and a stolen bomber with a swastika on its tail. He dived for the low, thick cloud cover, skimming the freezing waves of the Baltic Sea to stay beneath the German radar, he flying a heavy bomber like a fighter. For hours, they flew south. When they finally crossed the Soviet front lines, they were met with the roar of Soviet anti-aircraft batteries, shot at by their own people. Mikhail brought the heavy bomber down in a desperate belly landing in a field near Lielvard. They were home, but home was a hollow word in Stalin's Russia. The NKVD couldn't believe their story. 10 starving prisoners hijacking a German bomber. To the secret police, it sounded like a fabrication, a German plot. They were stripped of their ranks and sent to filtration camps. Mikhail was interrogated for months, treated not as a hero, but as a potential traitor. His comrades were sent to penal battalions. Of the 10 who escaped, only 3 would survive the final weeks. Mikhail was forgotten, a former prisoner. Mikhail was eventually discharged with a black mark on his name that prevented him from ever flying again. The hero's welcome was a cell and a single light. For 12 long years, Mikhail lived in Kazan, working as a manual laborer and a porter at the river port. He was a man of the sky, forced to walk the earth in silence. The intelligence he provided about the Peenemünde facility was the foundation upon which the Soviet rocket program was built. He watched as the world moved on. But Mikhail lived in the shadows, a hero branded by the stigma of capture. He didn't ask for medals, he just wanted to work. Korolyov was looking for him. A man named Sergei Korolyov, the father of Soviet rocketry, knew the truth, and in 1957 he finally spoke up for the pilot who brought him the secrets of the V-2. On August 15, 1957, Mikhail Devyatayev was finally awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. He became the captain of the Meteor, the first hydrofoil ship. Once again, a man of speed, a man of the water who felt like he was flying. He had finally returned to his element, no longer a prisoner of his past. Mikhail had become a legend, not just of war, but of the relentless human spirit. He saw his story become a legend not of war, but of survival. Mikhail Devyatayev didn't just steal a plane. He stole back his identity and the pride of a nation. Mystery Ledger will remember. Mikhail Devyatayev passed away on November 24, 2002 at the age of 85. He saw the world change from biplanes to the space race he helped ignite. His story remains the greatest escape in aviation history, a story of 10 men who chose certain death over captivity and found their way home. It is a reminder that even in the darkest labor camp, under the shadow of the weapons, one man's imagination can still take flight. Good night. Sometimes survival isn't about strength, it's about imagination. And imagination is the one thing no cage can ever hold.